So I'm on a roll here, filming videos, and so I'm just going to continue. This is a video of the other things I did in April, the books I finished, the shows I finished, films I watched, or like maybe I caught up on a show, but they weren't necessarily favorites for the month. I also have my handy notebook here that I always like write everything down in. So I wrote what I've been up to, finishing books, shows, and watching and rewatching movies. I'm just gonna start with the books. Books that I had been reading for too long. I'm not gonna get into it. First, here we go. This one. I feel very accomplished after finishing this just because I had been reading it for so long, but I wasn't really reading it. It's just that it was like on my currently reading list, but I hadn't picked it up in months, basically. And that's The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. I don't like this book. We're just gonna say that. I don't like this book. I started it, and the first like 60 pages were good, and I liked it, but then I didn't pick it up again for a while, and then I picked it back up again, and then it was like just okay, but I was like kind of struggling, and I decided to get the audiobook, and then because I got the audiobook, I felt like I had to finish it. Like, I'm unsure if I would have finished it if I didn't get the audiobook, because I felt bad because I used one of my dad's credits on Audible because he has Audible credits, and we basically share them sometimes, or like I'm allowed to use them, or not all of them, but like one every once in a while, and I felt bad that I used a credit, and now I think I've learned since then that I think you can return a credit, but maybe it like depends on how long ago you got that audiobook. I don't really know. All I know is I finally finished The Little Friend, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I rate books out of 5 stars just because that's the way that Goodreads is, and I use Goodreads to write reviews, which I will link in the description. I like review to The Little Friend here, and then the next book. And I think that's gonna be all the links. But I always like list everything in my in the description. So, The Little Friend. I will tell you about my experience reading this book, which has a creepy cover. I hate this cover. It has a creepy doll on it that I don't even know why this is the cover. I just have a lot of problems with this book. But, surprisingly, the last, 150 pages I liked. I'm going to tell you my experience reading this book. I think it's 555 pages. This edition, at least. Yeah. So, this is a pretty big book. I mean, I've read longer. I've also read shorter, clearly. Unimportant. When I first started reading it, the very first thought I had about this book is, this needs an editor. Because the first paragraph is like 2 sentences, and the second sentence has like 5 semicolons in it, and it's not a list. She's just continuing to write this one sentence for no reason. Why? You just make it like 5 sentences. Is that out of focus a bit? Okay. Just make it more sentences. Not one. It's fine. This has like a prologue and then like 7 chapters or something like that. Like not that many chapters and long chapters. And I don't think I work well with books like that. Actually, that's something that happened with the next book that I'll be talking about. It didn't have that many chapters, and the chapters were long. And I think that drags books out for me because it'll make me like put off picking up that book because I know the next chapter is long. If that makes sense. Like, I don't want to be interrupted or stop in the middle of a chapter. So this book, oh wow. I probably am going to talk about this for like 10 minutes, I feel like. But I thought this book was going to be a like mystery thriller, but also knowing what Donna Tartt's other books are about, I knew that it was going to be more like dramatic. Sorry if you like see my fingers, just because I'm making sure I'm in focus. I knew that like the way that Donna Tartt's other stories are, just from knowing what her other books are about, they're also like more dramatic than mysteries per se. I just was expecting more of like a thriller kind of thing with this, and it's about Harriet, who, when she was a baby, her older brother was found, like, this is, really sad, by the way. I don't know if this is, like, a trigger warning or anything like that, but her brother was found hanging in their backyard. So, obviously murdered. And, now Harriet's, like, middle school age, and she's known as being, like, Robin's little sister, and that was her brother's name, and she's very precocious. She thinks she's, like, smarter than everyone else, which I have a feeling is going to be, like, a sort of theme with Donna Tartt's books. I have here The Secret History, but I haven't read it yet. I thought, here's my head between her books, I thought that The Secret History was her second book. And so I wanted to read. I had heard that this was her. I had heard mixed things. I heard that this was her worst book, or like the worst of the three, or the least favorite of the three books that she has between The Secret History, The Little Friend, and The Goldfinch. Then I had also heard that her books get better, which made me think also that like this was her first book. No, it's her second. The Secret History is her first book, and I wanted to read them in chronological order of, like, when they were published, because I had heard that they get better. But I guess it's fine that I started out with this, because I didn't like it that much. I have The Secret History, and I haven't read it yet, and I still want to read it. Like, it wasn't enough to completely cross off Donna Tartt from my list, especially because the premise of The Secret History has me more intrigued anyway. As well as for this, I really think it was just like the mood I was in, especially with my expectations, because it wasn't very much of a mystery, and it wasn't very much of Harriet, like, yes, she was trying to figure out, did I even finish that thought that she's, like, really precocious, and she decides to investigate and try to figure out who killed her brother. That's the main premise, but, like, really, it's just sort of the catalyst for her snooping around the town and getting to know the townspeople more, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like it's very much more about the characters than the plot. And I'm pretty sure Robin's killer isn't even revealed. Like, we don't even know who it is, unless it's, like, insinuated or hinted at, and I just didn't pick it up. And I tried to look it up, and I'm pretty sure it's not ever revealed, but people have, like, theories about it, which, whenever I look up things that have to do with whether it's a book or a movie that I, like, didn't enjoy a lot, but then I start, like, getting into theories and that kind of thing, it always makes me, like, have a little bit of a different perspective on it. That's what I think with, like, the plot. It wasn't very thriller-like, and that's what I wanted when I first read it, and I wasn't getting it, and I think it was really affecting the way that I was thinking about the book. It took me some time to read, but then, most recently, like in April, when I finally picked it back up again and was like, I'm gonna finish this, I actually was enjoying it more. But I think it could be because I was like, alright, I know what I'm getting into now, I'm more familiar with the writing, I still remember things about the characters, and so this is what I'm expecting because I've already read most of the book. At that point, I was more than halfway through, but it was still like 61% of the way through, according to Goodreads. So I read like 40% of this book in April. And the last like 200 pages or so, I actually really liked, and I liked a lot more than everything else that I had read. I do like the prologue though, because it's atmospheric and introduces the sort of tone to the story and like the town, the characters and everything. But then at the same time, I feel like a lot of the setup, as much as there was a lot of setup in the prologue, I feel like there was a lot of setup in the book, in the rest of the book as well, just in the way that we're introduced to characters. And I couldn't tell, like, my biggest problem with this book and why it felt like it was taking so long and why I didn't feel like picking it up sometimes is because there were scenes that I just didn't feel like were necessary or couldn't figure out why they were important. And maybe it was because it was introducing a character a certain way, or we were getting a greater picture of what the town is like and what the town's people are like, because it takes place in like the 70s in Georgia or Alabama, one of the southern states. So there's like racism. So there were just scenes that I couldn't figure out the importance of, and that was making it like lag a bit with the story. Yeah, but again, my thoughts are kind of all over the place, but the last like 200 pages I was really into, because it was building a bit. The pacing was going faster. Maybe it's because I was reading it along with listening to the audiobook, and I was listening to the audiobook on like 2-point-something speed because the narrator was really slow. I don't know who the narrator is off the top of my head, but I'll leave that information in the description. Yeah, but because I liked the last like 200 pages a lot more than the rest of the book, and I was enjoying it, it changed my rating. My initial rating, I was like, this is going to be a 1 out of 5 stars, but no, it's a 2 out of 5 stars. I finished it, and I'm actually like really excited to read The Secret History, just because I'm pretty good at figuring out what kinds of books are going to be favorites of mine. Same with like films. The only thing that I wouldn't necessarily know until I watch the film or until I read the book is just the way that it's like directed or written, depending on if it's a film or a book. Moving on to the next book that I finished, and that is American Isis: The Life and Art of Sylvia Plath by Carl Rollyson. And if you remember, if you were here for my February, like, basically the first video I made after I hadn't made a video in like a year. I was reading this in February. Again, it was just something that I had been reading for far too long, and I finally finished, and it's a solid 3 out of 5 stars. The thing is, a lot of it was review information for me because I've already read 2 other biographies about Sylvia Plath, as well as just a lot of information online and articles about her and parts of her journal, poetry of hers, just a lot. And so a lot of this was just review information. There wasn't really anything new other than, I do have to say, I feel like I learned more about some other people who were involved in her life, like Al Alvarez and Elizabeth Sigmund. But what was her last name before Sigmund? I can't remember. But Elizabeth and Al Alvarez. They were friends of hers, and I just feel like I got to know more about the secondary characters in her life. And even Ted, which, reading this book made me want to know more about Ted Hughes, because I've never really read anything about him other than how he's connected to Sylvia Plath. And I don't think I've read any of his poetry either. But I have a memoir by his brother, which I'm currently reading. I kind of have mixed feelings on the way that it was written, because there were parts where I thought that the author's bias came out a little bit too much, but then there were also parts that I thought were really well written and well said for a biography. Like, not too analytical, not too much bias, or a bias at all. This also suffered from having not that many chapters and then being really long. I did mark a lot of things though, but the thing I do with, I'm just like looking through it real quick. The thing I do with a lot of nonfiction books are just mark things that I either like the way that they're written, or information that I think is most important to that person's life, if it's like a biography about a person. Oh, I also got to know Ted's sister more, Olwyn, or something like that. It's an odd name that I've never seen before. I'm going to spell it. Olwyn. Olwyn? I don't know. She really was a controlling factor in Sylvia Plath's estate after she died, and I did not know that. Like, I knew that she had to do with certain things, but I didn't know how, like, influential she really was with the way that her and her brother were portrayed in like other Plath biographies that came out around the time that, you know, basically she committed suicide, and then people were like, we need to write a biography about her. Like, I don't know. I guess that was just like the mentality of people. I mean, I guess it kind of still is, isn't it? Some famous person dies, and then it's like, here's a biography about that person that just died. Maybe you'll find out more about their personal life that you never knew about. Yeah, I thought that was interesting because I didn't realize like how much of a controlling figure she was, and in a lot of things that happened with the way that we perceive Sylvia Plath in general, just because of how much happened right after she died. And yeah, I could probably continue on, but I should like really learn to stop talking sometimes. And then the other book that I read that I think I completely read it actually in April. So this isn't one that I had started previously and then finished in April. It was The Glass Castle, which I listened to the audiobook. And this is narrated by the author, Jeannette Walls. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars? I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 because ultimately it's like really hard to rate something that is an autobiography. Like, it's her memoir. Well, those words are different. It's her memoir. I'm not gonna like rate her life or what I think about her life, and yeah, but it was really interesting, and just to have that sort of perspective, like I don't think I have many thoughts on it. Ultimately, it was just interesting, especially because she had a different like lifestyle growing up. If you don't know what The Glass Castle is about, Jeannette grew up basically homeless. Her parents lived pretty much not like off the grid, but they would move around a lot. They never really had any property. Her dad was like drunk a lot and had odd jobs here and there, but they weren't ever consistent. Her mom sometimes had jobs, but not all the time. And, you know, her parents were very free, and I'm not like, it's hard because they made like lifestyle choices for themselves, but then also they just continued with that after they had children. And I kind of question like why they had children. Oh, okay, well, maybe it was like a birth control thing. I don't know. Because I think Jeannette Walls was born in the 60s. Maybe it was like a birth control thing. I don't know what birth control was like in the 60s or 70s or even 50s. She's like fine. Like Jeannette, she's fine now. She's like a successful writer, and like, I mean, but she also got out of like that life and went away. But the lifestyle that her parents continued to live after that they had children, their kids became adults at like middle school ages, and then they had to be the adults, and they were working jobs, trying to babysit and mow lawns and do things that they could to get money so that they could pay for things like electricity and water, and like they didn't have plumbing. And the Glass Castle is like a metaphor for, it's what her dad called like their home. Like he was gonna buy them a home or buy a property and build a glass castle, but he never stuck to it. He never did any of the work. He just got property at points in their lives, and then didn't do anything with it. Most of the money that they got, he spent on alcohol and prostitutes, I'm guessing. I'm sure he paid for the prostitutes. It's also, especially when she's talking about the things that happened when she was younger, there's this whimsical fairy tale essence to how she grew up, until she reached a certain age where she realized this isn't good. You know, we as in like her and her siblings, they could be taken away from their parents at any moment. Because her parents were unfit parents, and especially if there was somebody else, another adult around who recognized this, and Child Protective Services came, then who knows, and they wouldn't want to be split up. and things like that. So once she got to a certain age, and once her siblings got to a certain age and realized that things aren't good, you know, the tone and the way that she was writing changed. But I like that she includes, like, when she was younger, it really does make it seem like her parents were making things sound so magical, and they were just living free, and it didn't matter. No one's gonna, like, tell them what to do, and they're not gonna stick to any rules and things like that. Anyway, that was all over the place too. I'm just saying everything that I can think of, basically, and talking about them for too long. What's new? So, those are the books that I finished in April. And then